Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 15th of January, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me today we have Charles Malet and Vanessa Beeley. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you very much,
and
Mike.
Vanessa. We're going to start today with foot and mouth disease. And, the government has announced what they describe as measures to prevent the spread of foot and mouth disease. And this is because a case has been confirmed in Germany. So here we have a tweet from the British Frozen Food Federation saying important information. DEFRA have issued important information for traders following the detection of foot and mouth disease in Germany. Essential information, actions and FAQs can be found on their website. Well, this is because Germany reported foot and mouth disease to the World Organization for Animal Health. Cases were identified, it was 5 days ago they made this report, cases were identified in water buffalo in Brandenburg, and they say that 3 of a herd of 14 are dead as a result. This is the first report of foot and mouth disease in Germany since 1988, and the first cases in the European Union since 2011. The German National Reference Laboratory for Foot and Mouth Disease has, you get this, characterized the causative virus as serotype O. They haven't identified it. They've characterized it. Is it a cartoon? Is it? Are we seeing Corona coming back in a new guise? It's hard to say. Yes, but they do say that the exact origin and incursion route is currently unknown. Now we're going to look at a map in a second, and that point is really important. So keep that in mind for a second or two's time. The local authorities in Germany have taken control and protection measures, including restrictions on susceptible animal movements in Brandenburg and Berlin, and get this, a 1 kilometre cull around the infected premises. So we have the return of the slaughtered on suspicion policy, which was so effective in destroying a large swathe of British farming in 2001. They are also suspending export health certificates and the closure of zoos as well, while further tests are being carried out by the German National Reference Laboratory. So the import of cattle, pigs and sheep from Germany is now banned into the UK to protect farmers and their livelihoods, because we've got to protect everybody. And the UK Chief Veterinary Officer is also urging livestock keepers to remain vigilant to the clinical signs of foot and mouth disease following this case. There are no cases in the UK at the moment, and in fact, if we look at the map here, this is the World Organization for Animal Health, their official FMD status map, and you can see that apparently there is a suspension of foot and mouth free status in parts of Central Asia there, but I'm not clear how this virus has jumped to Germany. It has just appeared spontaneously out of nowhere. How does that work, Charles?
This is something that I don't think can ever be made clear, but it's just yet another example of confirmation bias, in that if you look for a particular thing and you use certain methods, i.e. tests, to confirm your prejudice or your bias, then you will find exactly what it is you're looking for. And this seems to be yet another example of it. So I think we'd all put our money on this appearing here soon.
So there are no cases in the UK currently, as we said, and foot and mouth disease, we should note, poses no risk to human or food safety. But apparently it's highly contagious viral disease of cattle, sheep, pigs, and other cloven-hooved animals, and this is the important thing. So if we look at foot and mouth disease here, they claim is a viral infection. Cattle in 2001 were slaughtered on suspicion in huge numbers in the UK, but no similar measure was taken against wild cloven hoof animals such as deer. And so if you believe the virus narrative, then the deer were mixing with domesticated animals such as cows and so on. And apparently that wasn't a problem. How did that work?
Well, again, I mean, you once you've confected your story, you just put bits in and substitute them as appropriate, similar with badgers and TB, or of course deer and TB, these creatures that are magically able to carry such and such an illness without being susceptible in any way to it.
So we put that back up again. We've farms were subject to lockdown at that time. That has happened in Germany again, and the public were required to walk through disinfectant. Now, again, if you are in agreement with the idea that the viruses exist, then you will know that the official story is that disinfectant has no effect whatsoever on viruses. So, but the public were required to walk through disinfectant in certain public places like ports and airports and other public areas. And this was a bit of conditioning that we then saw massively amplified during the COVID thing. And we must not forget that the source of the slaughtered on suspicion policy was this man. Remind me of his name.
Well, it's not so much the name, is it? It's the piece of calculating equipment he has. But Neil Ferguson's
yes, Neil Ferguson and his calculator, and so he was responsible for that at that time, and of course he was responsible for lockdown policy and the claims of mass deaths in the UK during COVID as well. So just to finish off, if you haven't seen the documentary that we produced many, many years ago now on the foot and mouth disaster in the UK and the way that the farming community was massively damaged by it because, for example, some farmers would get compensation, others wouldn't, and so on. This was breaking up communities and whatnot. It was an incredible operation at the time. It destroyed huge numbers of animals unnecessarily. The policy continues with bird flu, and now we're possibly going to see this again. It is incredible.
It is absolutely incredible. In fact, I mentioned on the BBC News this morning a reference to the number of animals that were killed on suspicion, which was 6 million, which is a vast number. It really is, and yet we seem to learn nothing. And of course, as discussed recently about bird flu, we seem to be rolling out exactly the same practices over and over again.
We're sticking with farming.
We are. Now, last week I spoke about the two conferences happening in Oxford, the Oxford Farming Conference and the Oxford Real Farming Conference, the first of which Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, spoke at. And no great surprise in what he said. He talked about food and environmental sustainability without really explaining how the two things can be conducted side by side in the manner that has been suggested by governments all over the world. But what he did demonstrate was that the masterstroke played by the Chancellor when the budget was released at the end of October, in that the understandable fuss about agricultural property relief and inheritance tax on agricultural land has proved to be an enormous distraction, and therefore has put farmers in mind that this is the central existential threat posed, when in fact the situation is not exactly that straightforward. It is rather more that there are many government policies at the heart of the existential threat, rather than the spectre of inheritance tax around which solutions can be worked. But of course, the result is that Reid and indeed the government are only really bashed and protested against on the APR side of things. Now, he talked about diversification, and just to pop a slide up on screen to illustrate what he meant, if you hadn't guessed, of course, more renewable energy, and indeed that really seems to be the only form of diversification, certainly nothing to do with producing food in a different format. And he boasted of a £5 billion investment in farming. Of course, that's dwarfed by the commitment to, for example, Ukraine, which puts in perspective the government's disdain for the production of food and indeed the management of farming in this country. Now, this really should be seen as a part of an attack on small and medium-scale farmers, but as I say, not necessarily by the APR side of things, rather more by regulatory policy. For example, the Rare Breed Survival Trust talking about the decline of small abattoirs and therefore making it not a viable proposition for those occupying the smaller space, or indeed with breeds that have unique characteristics and therefore cannot be dealt with by larger scale abattoirs because, of course, they're not set up to deal with them. So it's pushing smaller farmers out of business. Of course, the result for the consumer is fake meat, or indeed meat that's been produced in subpar conditions, which, going back to Mike's segment on foot and mouth, would explain certainly why such symptoms might be displayed. The other thing to bring out is, of course, the work of what's called BOFIN. I apologise because I can't remember what the acronym actually stands for, but this is concerning gene editing. Now, the the primary legislation has gone through on this, but in the spring of this year, 2025, we're going to be seeing secondary legislation coming out, specifically with regard to England and how gene editing in England is going to go ahead, of course, posing the question of what happens to the devolved administrations, and indeed with the mood music being for closer relations with Europe, how this is dealt with there, because in the European Union at the moment, gene editing is not something that can be considered. So that was what came out of, or at least the main points to come out of the Oxford farming conferences. And the other thing that's on the immediate horizon, which is causing a lot of concern for reasons that are about to become clear, is the Climate and Nature Bill. Now, I've pulled up the page from the government website and highlighted this particular bit of text because it says there are no publications for this bill yet. This can often happen in an early stage of a bill when it's not been fully drafted. So 2 points to make there. First of all, the second reading will be on Friday the 24th. Friday, typically a day where the attendance in the House of Commons is very low, meaning that to push something through, or at least slip it under the radar, is made much easier. But secondly, to point out that why on earth would government not have the data comprised by the bill itself when 0 Hour, as dealt with previously by Mike on UK Column News, does have a copy of the bill. So you can go to that website to look at the PDF version of what is contained. And the main point to make is that the language used is suitably vague to make it sound like there is, of course, a climate emergency. We must respond. And indeed, the various actions to be taken are not so specific as to be measured or to be have the possibility of being measured very accurately, so that the idea of whether or not it's succeeding is not something that's necessarily dealt with by it. But of course, it rests on the premise that an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius would be in the world's temperature, however on earth that's actually measured, would be catastrophic, something that, of course, is completely unsubstantiated because nobody knows, and yet that is what we work our way towards. I think it's also worth pointing out that one of the sponsors of this private member's bill is the Labour MP Alex Sobel, and there was some controversy in recent times about his meeting with Population Matters, something that he aimed to clarify, but just to have an understanding of who these people are. They promote positive, practical, ethical solutions, encouraging smaller families, inspiring people to reduce excessive consumption, and helping us all to live within our planet's natural limits. We support human rights, women's empowerment, and global justice. So really what they mean is they are interested in anything that is suggestive of a decrease in population. And I think it's therefore very significant to think that somebody putting forward a bill of this nature is involved or has been involved in meetings with an organisation considering an outcome of a reduced population. Now, as to the contents of the bill itself, there are certain things that they would like the Secretary of State to be bound to do, hitting various targets. Of course, offsetting is one of the critical words that's often used in any language pertaining to net zero, which means effectively if you have enough money here, you may do what you please in order that somebody somewhere else may not do that very thing. They talk about such nebulous concepts as UK emissions to be no more than proportionate to their share of the global carbon budget. Well, I'm not sure quite who's going to be measuring that, or indeed how it will be calculated, but somebody has tried to put a figure on it, perhaps with the assistance of Neil Ferguson's calculator, who knows. There's also a pledge to end fossil fuels in all their forms, whether it be through the recovery or the use of fossil fuels. So I suppose one hope, as it were, may be that there is industry pushback in the form of lobbying versus this particular point. Although, of course, if money can be made out of it by those companies that are currently engaged in the production and resourcing of fossil fuels, then, of course, that could be dead in the water as a point of opposition. It has a certain amount of woke or progressive credentials, I think, to highlight three. It specifically says that it is to have a positive impact on those experiencing deprivation, the youth, and those with protected characteristics. Now, quite why they should form a more significant part of the population than any other is a mystery, and it's not qualified by the bill. Also, significantly, with regard to sortition, the topic that's been covered by Ben Rubin in particular on UK Column News, there is to be the establishment of what's called an independent expert body to represent the UK, a climate and nature assembly. Now, again, it's not specified how those people will be selected or indeed exactly what their remit will be, but they will wield a significant amount of power, as will the Climate Change Committee and the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. Now, we'll just have a quick look at a video of the previous chair of the Climate Change Committee trying to answer what I thought was a very straightforward question. What I would ask is how do you explain the proposition that approximately 3% of overall emissions of carbon dioxide, which are anthropogenic, can affect the climate in such a way that 97% of biogenic emissions seem not to be able to?
Well, it's very fact. First of all, I don't say that. That's what almost every scientist in the world, every single major scientific institution says. That's the first thing.
Now, he's subsequently moved on, but clearly had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. And the current incumbent, Piers Forster, has so far refused my 3 requests for interview with UK column. So we'll see how that goes. Now, if you're interested in doing what you can to stop this bill from proceeding, there's going to be an open Zoom call this evening, a link to which will be in the show notes. And really, I just wrap up by saying that, of course, the point of this piece of legislation is that it's suitably vague to be passed at this stage, i.e. the primary stage, where it would form an Act of Parliament upon which secondary legislation can be built, and that's where the detail would be. And that's exactly where the land use and indeed land ownership, among many other things, comes under significant threat. Mike, I don't know if we've got time for any further sort of comment from you on where you think this is going to go.
We'll talk about that in extra, absolutely. Okay. But let's move on to international affairs and welcome Vanessa to the programme. Vanessa, what has David Lammy been up to then?
Well, the usual rank hypocrisy on his tour of the Middle East in increasingly ill-fitting suits, I have to note, in all of his photographs. So first of all, he welcomes Iraq's prime minister to discuss, guess what, fighting Daesh or ISIS as we know them in Syria and Iraq. So UK increasing again its involvement and intervention in West Asia, particularly in Syria and Iraq, as they always have done, of course. And of course, we have to remember the UK is funding the ISIS holding camps in the northeast of Syria. And then he bangs on about climate and sustainable energy with the foreign minister. I don't need to add anything to that. Then basically you have him meeting the head of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas. And he talks, of course, about the two-state solution in the wake of the so-called ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, and talks about an empowered Palestinian Authority with a very aging Mahmoud Abbas in charge. And, of course, recently there are multiple reports on this, but this is just one from the cradle. Mahmoud Abbas's big gamble to crush West Bank resistance. And of course, there have been attacks by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, on resistance factions and on civilians, particularly in the West Bank. Then Lammy goes on to meet with members of the Zionist regime and the families of the hostages with strong UK links, bearing in mind the UK was providing so-called intelligence and surveillance to try and find the UK-linked hostages in Gaza. The government is using every diplomatic lever and leaving no stone unturned in our efforts to bring Emily and her fellow hostages home. However, of course, what Lammy doesn't mention are the thousands of Palestinian hostages or prisoners that have been taken, over 10,000, both before 7th of October and after 7th of October. And this is just a very short 30-second clip from a longer Euromed Monitor clip showing basically the Zionist forces' arrest of medical staff from the Kamal Adwan hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip, and the arrest of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who, according to the investigation and the report, has been taken to Stade Tayman, which is the prison that is notorious for the rape of interned Palestinian civilians who are accused of being part of Hamas. And it goes into great detail about the mistreatment of Dr. Hussam by the Zionist forces. This is not at all addressed by Lam.
Broken up and is not functioning at the moment. So let's see. Is it gonna come back? Yes. Are you back, Vanessa? No. No, she's not. Okay. Well, we'll have to move on from that then. And yeah, definitely not working. Are you back, Vanessa? Hello? No. Okay, she's going to try and reconnect. Okay, well, we'll come back onto that again in a second. Let's move on to this because are you back, Vanessa? No.
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Let's have a go then. So we were talking about.
Am I back?
Yes. No, this isn't going to work. I'm sorry about that. Try reconnecting again if you can. And look, what we'll do is we'll play the David Miller video because David Miller, who is someone who was presenting at the recent UK Column event in October, was successful in his employment tribunal against Bristol University over their discrimination of him and his position on Zionism. He won his tribunal case. But he has issued an update this week, so let's have a listen to this.
Hello, I'm David Miller. I regret to inform you that my landmark legal case against Bristol University is being appealed. My case established that anti-Zionist beliefs are protected under the Equality Act 2010. We achieved a landmark legal victory. The tribunal ruled decisively in my favour, confirming that Bristol University discriminated against me because of my anti-Zionist beliefs. They affirmed that my belief is profound and cohesive and worthy of respect in a democratic society. This verdict sets a vital precedent. No longer can employers harass, discipline, or dismiss workers simply for voicing opposition to the racist, colonial, and genocidal ideology of Zionism. However, our struggle is not over. Bristol University has decided to appeal the tribunal's ruling against them, and they are determined to overturn this vital precedent.
So David does need support. We'll have a link in the show notes for anybody that would like to help him out with his legal expenses. He needs to raise a reasonable amount of money, but I think this is a worthwhile effort. Vanessa, let's try once again. Back to normal. No, it's no problem. Yeah. Just before we come back onto the report on the Middle East, on Lamy, what are your thoughts on David's case? Right. Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry.
I would say, whilst we wait for Vanessa, the other thing, Mike mentioned that David spoke at UK Column on location on the 19th of October. I would encourage you to listen to what David said on that day if you haven't already done so. Again, a link to that in the show notes, because he spoke very, very well, and it is a completely extraordinary situation by background, so it really does merit another listening, even if you have already.
Right. I really regret to say the connection to Vanessa has completely broken down, and we're not going to be able to continue with that at the moment. So we'll see what happens later in the program. if that clears itself up. In the meantime, if you'd like to support the UK column, and we do need your ongoing support, thank you to everybody that does contribute to us financially, but we do need that to continue. If you go to support.ukcolumn.org, there are options to help us out there. You can make a donation or join as a member. And if you do join as a member, you get access to members-only content and a small reduction in the cost in the UK column shop as well. But if you would also like to support us by getting something from clive2carl.com, that would be very helpful as well. And we get a small percentage of every sale there, although it doesn't cost you any more to do that. Now, not everybody can afford to help us out in that way. That's okay. If you can't, please do at least share the material that you see on the UK column website and see if you can share that as far and wide as possible and get us round the various limitations of censorship and so on. Okay, look, let's move on. A quick advertisement here for Sandy Adams and Roger Meacock. That's going out at 1 p.m. tomorrow, and that'll be on the live stream. That's Debbie speaking to Sandy and Roger about what happened historically and globally to affect the situation that farmers currently find themselves in. This is part one of a series. Yesterday, tell us about this.
Well,
first.
this advertised last week, but coming up this Saturday near Exeter, there is going to be a meeting concerning food and farming. So if that's something that interests you, and certainly you do not need to be involved in farming, it's more to do with how to source your food from all the right places, ensuring that you get what you want at the right price and indeed satisfy those who are producing it for your benefit. And the details will be in the show notes for that meeting this Saturday.
And sorry, the blank slide there was supposed to be the interview with Mike Eden.
It was, yes, absolutely. Dr. Mike Eden, who gave a fantastic interview, something that he described as being one of his best. That went out yesterday and is now on the website. It was a very, very calm and rational, logical explanation of Mike's belief as to the willful failure of the design of the COVID vaccine, therefore with an intent to cause harm. And also he sets out his argument for debunking the narrative concerning contagion in the form of illness by virus delivery. So I would really encourage you to listen to it if you haven't done so already. But also what I would say is that it would be a very good one to share with other people, because the way in which Mike sets it out is so very clear. And of course, it's prefixed by his very impressive credentials in the pharmaceutical industry. So I really would get into that and share it far and wide, please.
Okay, now let's move on then to AI. And the British government has, on Monday, announced that they are throwing the full weight of Whitehall behind AI by agreeing, as they describe it, to take forward all 50 recommendations set out by Matt Clifford in his game-changing AI opportunities action plan. Now, Matt Clifford is described as a British entrepreneur, and in the spring of 2023, he helped design the Frontier AI Task Force, which later became known as the UK AI Safety Institute. Let's just have a look at Matt Clifford and what he had to say about this.
We're entering a new era of AI. This tech has the potential to improve everyone's lives across our country and to grow the economy. But to do this, we need to invest in the UK's infrastructure and skills. So here are 5 recommendations from my AI Opportunities Action Plan. First, we're creating new AI growth zones. These will speed up the construction of AI data centers, huge warehouses full of computers that power services like AI and data processing. This will help create new jobs and rejuvenate communities. And we'll set up an AI Energy Council to make sure that we power these zones in a clean and sustainable way. Second, we'll increase the government's compute capacity 20-fold this decade using new UK-owned supercomputers. With our own ability to churn through huge amounts of data, we can drive forward research in our public services, like the NHS. Third, we'll support our AI sector by hiring more UK-based AI companies to do government work. We'll make data sets publicly available and work with industry leaders to drive adoption. Fourth, we must train the UK's workforce in AI for future jobs. So we'll help employers upskill their staff and support universities to increase the number of AI graduates. And fifth, we'll pilot new ways to improve public services with AI, whether that's making it quicker to access healthcare or cutting admin for teachers. And this is all while we continue our leading work to develop AI safely. This plan means AI will be put to work at the heart of the government's missions. And that work starts today to rebuild the country, kickstart economic growth, and improve lives for everyone.
Impressed?
Well, I'm impressed by his suggestion that it eliminates admin for teachers. Presumably he means teaching.
Yes.
But no, I mean, to talk about AI, looking at the graphics, if you were able to view that on screen, it's amazing to be promoting something that is supposed to be absolutely at the front of the cutting edge, and to do it with graphics that look like they were concocted in the 1970s. So I would say that's a mixed message there. But no, not impressed.
Yes. Well, look, he talked about the first ever AI growth zones being set up, and these are areas across the country where the planning process will be subverted for the rapid build out of data centers, and to give them better, and they're going to give them better access to the energy grid, and also to draw in cash. Now, the first of these is going to be in Culham in Oxfordshire. A new digital centre of government is going to be set up within the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. This is going to revolutionise how AI is used in the public sector, they claim. And they also claim that this is going to improve citizens' lives and make government more efficient. We can believe that if we like. They also plan to set up a new team to keep us, I presume they mean them, at the forefront of emerging technology, and this team is going to what they describe as use the heft of the state to make the UK the best place for business, and so on. Now, look, what they're doing is they're guaranteeing corporations access to energy to run these data centers. And my first question is, are they removing that guarantee from the rest of us? And is that why we're seeing advertising everywhere at the moment from the National Grid warning us to prepare for blackouts? And I suspect it possibly is. What Matt Clifford was doing there was describing the fusion doctrine. He's describing a world where everyone's job is dependent and reliant on government. There's no better way to control a population, after all. And he's also describing a world ripe for the Post Office Horizon IT scandal to be a fraction of what we're going to see in the future, instead of being one of the biggest criminal conspiracies of our age. So I don't really know where this is going, but we already know what it's like to deal with these human faceless corporations that don't have any human contact with us anymore. You can't even email corporations in many cases, and increasingly we're going to be dealing directly with AI itself. And all these billions that this government is now announcing is being spent on AI, when they aren't even fixing the potholes in the roads. Is this where money should be going? And so the question then to end this is why is Starmer doing this? And it's because, in my opinion, it's because the intention is to increase the level of farming of us that goes on, our data, our lives. Health and social care is going to lead the way on this. And this is a massive data exercise. And of course, the data bill, which is coming, is a very big part of enabling it all. There's plenty of opportunity for us to get involved in pushing back against it, and hopefully we will. I think Vanessa's back. What we'll do is we'll do Charles's EV segment now, and then we'll come on to going back to Lammy and also the rest that Vanessa has for us. So thanks for sticking with it, Vanessa. I'm glad to see you back there. So do the EV segment and then we'll come on to that.
Will do. Now, today, with great sort of fanfare, we were told that sales of electronic vehicles have gone up 25% across the world. Of course, significant detail for anybody living in this country is that in Europe, that is represented by a decline of 3%. So, in fact, the traffic is not going in the direction that they would wish in this part of the world, which I should be taken as an encouraging sign. The market has, of course, been saturated, and indeed take-up so far has largely been as a result of absurd incentives that are met, of course, by the taxpayer. But the graph for Africa produced by Statista shows the current levels up to the black line represented on the graph, and to the right of which are projected sales. But I've put a great big red arrow towards the year of 2020, which was one, of course, of terrific acceleration in their terms after the political, economic and social pandemic, but not, of course, a health one. Talking about Africa, a good place to concentrate is Ethiopia, which has introduced legislation to prohibit the import of vehicles that are not battery powered, which of course is going to very much change the landscape, not least in a country that is not very well known for its stability of supply of electricity. But this is BYD. I've reported on them from Hong Kong, a Chinese manufacturer primarily of batteries. Now, interestingly, this coincides with the relaunch, or indeed a new launch, of the Ethiopian stock market. And one might think, how coincidental, and where will that go? But of course, the detail I'd like to pull out of it is that on the stock market's new website, they refer to a digital academy, and we just have a quick look behind that and see that that's done with the support of FSD Ethiopia, which is Financial Sector Deepening Africa, specifically the Ethiopia division. And who is that funded by? None other than the United Kingdom, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Swiss Re Foundation, and the International Finance Corporation. So we move from foreign influence, one might say, to consider foreign interference. And this takes us to the Horn of Africa, somewhere I've reported on a fair amount in the past, a place where the United Kingdom is determined to be able to play both sides, in saying that they are behind the sovereignty of Somalia, whilst also supporting the development of the port of Berbera in Somaliland, granting Ethiopia access to coast that they're otherwise denied. Now, this follows Mike's segment, because what you see on screen now, and if you can't see it, it's a photograph generated by artificial intelligence of what a Tesla gigafactory would look like in Berbera, Somaliland, according to Grok. If you haven't heard of Grok, well done. It's the Twitter X version of an artificial intelligence thing that you can ask questions of, and it will give you answers of some description. But nonetheless, it's created this fictional image. Now, to illustrate the dangers, one might say, of AI and the ludicrous directions that it can go in, further to this, there's now been a video produced of what Berbera might look like if such a development was to go ahead. And of course, I should reiterate at this point that this is based on absolutely nothing. Tesla have not said they're going to do this. This is purely somebody asking an AI tool what would happen if such and such a thing were to take place. But this is the AI video of it.
Berbera Port in Somaliland, located on the Gulf of Aden, is a vital gateway to Africa and a geostrategic hub on one of the world's busiest trade routes. For Tesla, this represents an unmatched opportunity to access Africa's booming markets and drive the continent's green revolution. Africa, with over 1.3 billion people, is rapidly urbanizing, and demand for electric vehicles and renewable energy is skyrocketing. Berbera offers Tesla a central base to deliver electric vehicles, solar power, and battery storage to East Africa, the Horn of Africa, and beyond all, while reducing costs and transit time.
So that's completely fake.
It's utterly and completely fake. But of course, it's now out there, and it means that people will look at it and it will get shared on social media. And before you know it, people will be convinced that Tesla is indeed setting up in the Horn of Africa. But of course, that is not outside the bounds of possibility, because of course, the Horn has enormous strategic importance, not just for the reasons I've mentioned just now, but also for its proximity to Djibouti and control of the Red Sea ports there, but specifically because of the location of the Americans, Chinese, and the Russians, all in that part of the world. So this is not so outlandish, but the problem is it may end up now driving a narrative. Now, whilst we talk about EVs and batteries, just as an aside, I'm just going to pull out a headline from the Daily Mail, effectively dismissing at will the suggestion that the enormous number of lithium batteries contained in the vicinity of Los Angeles, where the fires are being experienced, drones could have had anything to do with fire, as though in this particular instance, there's no way that a lithium battery would catch fire. So it is perfectly astonishing how the narrative is driven, pardon the pun, in this particular respect. Now, to come back to reality, of course, whilst that AI video is a nonsense, what's been happening in South Africa is most certainly not. And Bloomberg here reporting that Elon Musk has been meeting the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, and the critical detail to come out of this, bearing in mind how we're all supposed to behave in accordance to one another and international law. He and Musk have been in contact to discuss ways for the government to change the rules to allow Starlink's high-speed internet to operate legally in South Africa. Now, what does this have to do with EVs or with batteries or with Tesla, you might wonder. But of course, the deal is, first of all, in this age where diversity rules, the specific rules that they are talking about changing in South Africa is to do with the ownership, the law about ownership of the business being at least 30% black. And this is what Musk wants to change. In all likelihood, it will. But in delivering Starlink, or indeed foisting Starlink upon South Africa, he is effectively leveraging that against investment via Tesla to put up a Tesla plant in South Africa. And so that's effectively the way that this works. And although not in any way covert, this is a very good example of how corporate deep state entities will manipulate the situation in whichever country they victimize, or indeed the entire world. Now, last year, I showed how Starlink has been enabling the right kind of war. This was to do with the conflict in Russia and Ukraine and the SpaceX delivery of the Starlink communication platform, not enabling Russia, China, Belarus, Afghanistan, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Syria, or Iran from using its services. Now, an update to that, because this year, Venezuela and Cuba have now been permitted to use it. But of course, this is a double-edged sword, because it will, of course, be not just a control mechanism, but also a massive data harvesting exercise. So the question is really, do you as a country want Starlink to be running your communications platforms? I think that's a question that should be asked, particularly in light of where they're going with this development in Southern Africa and quite possibly in the Horn of Africa. We shall see how correct AI may be on that. The only thing I would add is also to just make reference to a comment made by Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, who has kicked up a fuss recently about Chinese involvement in renewable energy technology in the UK. And it seems remarkable that he can make such a comment and ignore the Israeli control over defence communications and technological platforms in the UK, or indeed the delivery of space assets and communications platforms via Elon Musk's many businesses.
And completely ignore the Israeli involvement in just about every piece of consumer electronics as well, in terms
Absolutely.
of internet connectivity and so on. Well, Vanessa, it looks like the connection has been stable for a little bit now. So are you there?
I am. I'm trying it on 4G now. I don't know what's happening with the internet the last 2 days.
Yeah, well
Sorry.
done. Well, that is fine. So let's come back on to David Lammy, and he was speaking with the new Syrian foreign minister.
Well, yeah, the foreign minister of the terrorist HTS group. And just to demonstrate, and of course, Lammy is not going to get hit with the Anti-Terrorist Act Section 12 when he returns to the UK, nor are any of the officials from Europe or from the UK, particularly, that have been visiting Syria and meeting with HTS, still a proscribed terrorist group in the UK. And if we look at, this was from the Charity Commission back in 2018, where actually they raised the alarm that the humanitarian aid, particularly from the UK, that was going through northern Syria on the border with Turkey at Bab al-Hawa, the fact that crossing was run by HTS, that was deemed a terrorist organization in May 2017. And of course, we know that the hypocrisy will continue and that HTS will effectively be normalized eventually. An article in Le Monde very recently shows that Syria's HTS is a movement that allegedly has de-radicalized from the top. And then if we look at a post on X from am I still there?
Sorry, yes, you are still there, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. A post from David Miller on X, basically saying he's talking about, as I said, the so-called ceasefire between Gaza and Israel. The argument that, of course, this is purely to make Trump look good, to give Netanyahu the reason that Trump forced him to make the ceasefire, and, of course, to enable normalization with the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia. And David draws attention to the fact that it's not just the Saudis that will Zionize. Syria's already finished. Lebanon and Iraq are on the chopping block. And Jordan and Egypt are expected to cede territory also. That's before we get to the Zionization deals that will be forced onto Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others. This is not a ceasefire. It's a way of opening up new theaters now that Gaza has been destroyed. And of course, we've been talking about the Zionization also of Europe, the UK, and the US for some time.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Vanessa. But let's move on then to the issue of sort of neo-colonialization, because obviously people that have been left behind in Syria are suffering badly.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I want to highlight, because we were talking about the fact, Mike, that, you know, we deal with the incoming threats. And then once we've dealt with one particular incoming threat, we kind of breathe a sigh of relief and we relax. And I think what happened in Syria demonstrates the length of time that the ruling elite are prepared to wait for their plans to come into effect. And therefore, any pushback can't be relaxed. It has to be maintained. So this is a headline. Turkey is angered by possible French presence on the Syrian border, which, of course, will be in the northeast, where they've been supporting the Kurdish separatists for some time. And then basically, Turkey has strongly rejected a proposal to deploy French troops along the Syrian border to establish a so-called secure zone. And what they basically say is, like, France is a small country. It can't act without the United States. Turkey is feeling very empowered at the moment, both towards Russia and towards the EU, and even, I would say, towards Israel and the US. This, of course, partitioning plan goes back to John Kerry, and it goes back way before that. But let's look at 2016. John Kerry talked about the partition of Syria, which could be part of Plan B if peace talks fail. In 2018, Turkey was already warning France that they could become a target for supporting the Kurdish separatists inside Syria. And then when we look at the fact that Turkey is now pushing for the elimination of the Kurdish-led US-allied Syria Democratic Forces, what he's basically saying is, I'm entitled to northern Syria, and nobody is going to get in and partition that area of the country. He's talking about not partitioning all of Syria, but what he's effectively talking about is protecting Turkish interests in the interest of the neo-Ottoman agenda. What we have seen are continued persecutions, particularly of Christians and Alawites, but also of Sunni Muslims that object inside Syria.
Yeah, right. I am very sorry, but clearly this is problematic today. So we're just going to have to move on, I'm afraid. Okay, let's move on then to what are we looking at?
Family courts.
Family courts, yes.
This, funnily enough, follows a segment that Brian was dealing with on Monday's news and concerned an article written back in 2018 for The Guardian about the kidnap of children by the state, written by a journalist called Louise Tickle. Now, we go on several years and find that she is currently in the Court of Appeal, and this is concerning the anonymisation of judges in family court hearings. So she is... the appeal started yesterday in the civil division of the Court of Appeal. There'll be a link in the show notes. And it certainly is a very interesting one to watch, specifically on the sort of technical basis of it. But really, her appeal is in her capacity as a journalist and is based on release of information by a family court, but the withholding of the judge. Now,
By that you mean the judge's identity?
Sorry, absolutely. The identity of the judge. The specific case is that of Sara Sharif, who was murdered by her parents following decisions taken by a family court. So whilst this could be seen as sort of pushing an agenda suggesting that the failure of the state to protect a child by taking it away from its parents is there, this really is about a wider issue, and this is now going through it, but it also deals with not just the judgment that was made to anonymize the particular judge, but also the faulty logic that was set out in order to make that decision. But of course, what it paves the way for is further anonymization, and therefore judges being able to act in such a way that they may not have considered previously because they know that they would be anonymous. And also, yet again, to mention AI, it's already been suggested by various judges that they would use AI in summing up. Is this indeed opening the door for further use of AI in the family courts, which obviously, as covered many times by UK Column, are a place of dire outcomes for families on a very unfortunately regular basis. Now, this also illustrates the way in which the Human Rights Act is wielded and the supposed balance between Article 8 and Article 10, Article 8 being the right to a private and family life, and Article 10 being freedom of expression, in this case, journalism and journalistic freedom of expression. And of course, it falls to a judge to decide in which, camp, effectively, the favour is to swing, which is effectively a bizarre and arbitrary mechanism for deciding the fate of children in the first instance, but also the public interest part of this, which of course is going to be obscured far further if this does go ahead. But as yet inconclusive because it's in session, so I will aim to get back to next week on exactly where this is going. I have been in touch with Louise Tickle to try to set up a telephone call with her to work out what she makes of this. Now, the only other thing to draw your attention to, first of all, the note from the Surrey County Court going back last year to the judgment that she is appealing, but also to point out that this appeal is being sponsored by Tortoise Media. Now, Tortoise Media has been covered an awful lot by UK Column in recent times, and of course, with the combining of Tortoise, the Guardian Media Group, and the Scott Trust, this does perhaps suggest a direction of travel for Tortoise.
Yes. Now, Vanessa was kind enough to send an article by Craig Murray to me yesterday, and I just want to highlight this. Maybe we'll get some comment on it in a second. The headline is How the Establishment Functions, the Real Dark Web. So in this article, Craig Murray is pointing out that, for example, Keir Starmer appointed this lady, whose name escapes me, so I do apologise, Alison Levitt, to basically investigate Starmer's role in the prosecution or non-prosecution of Jimmy Savile. Now, she is married to Lord Carlile, and the point that Craig Murray is making is that Lord Carlile is very good friends, or was very good friends, with two absolute paedophiles in Cyril Smith and Lord Janner. Now, he is not making any allegations against Lord Carlile at all, but as we'll see, you'll see the point that he's making in a second. So this is what he had to say. We now know that the police had a great deal of corroborative evidence for Beck's claim that Janner was abusing children in care homes. So this was one of the people who was making the claims about Lord Janner. I do not claim that Carlile knew this. I do not know, says Craig Murray. Carlile states that Janner is his friend, or was his friend. They were both MPs, both QCs, both members of Friends of Israel, both patrons of UK Lawyers for Israel and of the Friends of Israel Education Foundation. Alex Carlile may well have had no idea Janner was a paedophile after all. He shared a cramped parliamentary office with Cyril Smith for many years and apparently never realised Smith was a prolific paedophile. Possibly Alex Carlile is simply a particularly unobservant man, says Craig Murray. In the article, I've often noticed that ordinary people like you and I manage in general to live our entire lives with no connection of friendship to paedophiles at all. yet the powerful are always finding they're connected to Janners, Epstein, Savile, Smiths, Mountbattens, etc., entirely by accident. It is, of course, all nothing but accident, bad luck and coincidence. To wonder if it might be otherwise is to be a mad proto-fascist conspiracy theorist. Apparently, there's much more in this article, and I do recommend that people go and look at it. But Vanessa, before we come back to finish your segment, what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's fascinating. I think, as you said, to look into the depth of the web that is being woven at the moment with all the various grooming gangs and paedophile cases that are ongoing.
Yes, yes, indeed. And in the meantime, we focus on one particular demographic. And it's, as I've said before, it's right that anybody that's been involved in grooming gangs is absolutely prosecuted. Nobody would be suggesting otherwise. But we do have to recognize the reality of this country and see the situation for what it is. It's much broader than that one particular issue. Okay, look, let's finish off by coming back to your segment then. And I think we had got to this point, the issue of the minorities. Yes.
Yeah, the issue of the gallows being erected to further persecute, particularly the Alawites on the coast. And recently, one of the leaders of the Alawites has actually called for French, French intervention. Now, of course, this goes back to the history of Syria, the Alawite region, which is known to be in the coastal areas, which became part of Syria as a byproduct of the notoriously secret 1916 Sykes-Picot agreement between France and Britain. It was placed under the French mandate after the end of World War I. And after defeating and evicting the British-backed Syrian King Faisal in 1920, France, in a divide and rule strategy, partitioned Syrian territories into 4 parts, one of which was Latakia, where most of the population was Alawite. And of course, that gave France control over the Levant coastal region. And if we look at, this is basically the French mandate map. You can see the Alawite state in purple. You can see the Aleppo state in the north, which now, of course, is being contested by not only Turkey and France, but also the US and Israel, the state of Damascus, the Druze state in the south. They're very similar to what we're seeing attempted now in Syria. And of course, I mentioned last week, we're seeing the race again between France and Turkey to gain control of the coastal area and the gas reserves off the coast of Syria, very important. And again, people can freeze frame the next map and take a good look, but this is what the Ottoman Empire consisted of, and this is clearly what Erdogan is trying to head towards. The dark brown is the original Ottoman Empire, and the various colors of pink are the areas into which the Ottoman Empire expanded into. The white are basically the vassal states. So again, we can see the direction of travel, both for France, the EU, the US, Israel, Qatar, the Gulf states, and Turkey by looking at these maps. And this was actually a map that has been produced by the Institute of the Study of War, which shows, again, very clearly the current partitioning. The striping is the area that was called contested Syrian territory. The blue circle is the Al-Tanf unlawful US military base. And then you have the various armed factions in yellow in the south and around Al-Tanf, some of which, of course, were, let's say, brought together by Russia after the Darar agreement in 2018, and they formed the 5th Legion, which was the legion that actually invaded Damascus before HTS, but most likely under the control of Israel and the US. You have there also in the brown the coastal region, which includes, as we've mentioned, the Alawite state or the proposed state, but all of that area currently is under the control of the neo-Ottoman forces, HTS and the Turkmen, who also have control. The Turkmen, which are the formerly Free Syrian Army in the yellow areas in the north, and then also the Israeli US EU project in the purple, which is the SDF. So unfortunately, as I said, we're heading towards what appears to be the increased persecution of minorities in Syria, which will lead to the calls for foreign intervention, which will lead to the partitioning project coming to fruition. So as I said, and I want to finish on that very quickly, we must never relax our resistance. We must never bring down our guard, because while we are relaxing, they are planning and preparing the next steps. And I think, this is an incredibly important lesson that we need to take away from what happened in Syria.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. And I think that's one of the things that I want to talk about a bit more in extra as well. Now, look, what we're going to do is, because Vanessa's segments today were a bit broken up, we will get those edited together. So when Kenny puts out the extracts from that, no, don't apologize. It's not your fault. So when Kenny puts out the extracts, we'll put those out as proper segments, two separate segments as they were intended to be in the first place. But we got to leave it there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. We'll be back if you're a UK Column member in a few minutes for some extra. Otherwise, we will see you on Friday. But don't forget the interview tomorrow at 1 p.m. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.